Sheet Metal Training Step 4.1 An Introduction to the Rectangular Pressure Files. To get to the pressure files, we must use the Setup menu. Click the Setup menu from the Main menu button, and you'll be taken to your Setup menu where you'll see a list of setups on the left-hand side and the tabs for all of your pressure files located across the top. We're going to begin by looking at the rectangular pressure files, and we'll start with the 2-inch standard SMACNA low pressure galvanized file as our example. Click the file if it is not already highlighted, and simply hit the Edit button at the bottom of the screen to open the file. All rectangular pressure files will look the same. They all have the same main menu screen. It doesn't matter the pressure class or the material type that you are in. If you get confused and you don't remember which file you have open for editing, simply look at the top in the title bar and it'll show you the name of the file, 2-inch standard SMACNA low pressure galvanized. Located down on the left hand side, you'll see that there is a list of buttons for setup for this pressure file. Over on the right hand side, you'll see that there are all of the items that are available for the pressure file. These items all have labor tables underneath them. By clicking one of the items, you'll be taken to the labor table for this specific item. Going back to the menu button at the top will return you back to the pressure file menu. The information that's listed on all of these setup pages have to do with this specific pressure class and material type. This button says materials, so we should have galvanized material type set up because we are in a galvanized material. This button says joints and reinforcements. On this page we should have joint connectors and reinforcements that are qualified for a 2-inch pressure class since we are in a 2-inch pressure file. All files are built to their pressure class. You will then allow options within that pressure class to override away from the defaults. Let's now look at each of the pages more specifically, starting with the labor rates. The labor rates page gives you 3 options. The first option will tell the program to use the labor rate that is selected for the zone when the zone is created. In other words, if you're using this option, whatever you pick for your job as your labor rate, your dollar per hour, that is the same rate that is going to be used for all of the items taken off from this pressure file. The option below that, to use a specific labor rate, allows you to select a specific rate to be used with this file. The program will then always use that labor rate with this file when it is loaded, no matter what you have selected for your job. As an example, I'll select this option, click the drop down, and I'll change it to my change order labor rate. Now, whenever this 2-inch standard SMACNA low pressure galvanized file is loaded, the change order labor rates will always be used, with no option to change to a different labor rate available while this file is loaded. Option 3 allows you to use a custom set of labor rates. You can click into the box and type in what you wish to have used whenever this file is loaded. It just saves you a step. You don't have to go back to your data file and set up another labor rate. You can add it in here on the fly. Most common is use the currently loaded labor rate within the file. However, if I were building a file specifically designed for change orders, I would most likely want to switch to that labor setup and pick it as an option. Let's return back to the menu screen, and next is the materials page. The materials page has a list for all of the 5 types of material classifications in our program. You can have standard lengths of 72, 60, and 48 inches, or coil widths of 6 foot, 5 foot, and 4 foot. We allow you to dictate what you want to be considered standard length duct coming out of your shop from production. The way this file is currently set up, you can see that anything that was manufactured at a full length of 6 foot would be considered a fitting. Our standard length, or our coil, is set to run off of 5 foot. Everything else is listed as a fitting. The option down at the bottom is include metal cost. You have 3 choices: no, yes, and each. You would set it to no if you were buying all of your rectangular duct and fittings and did not want to include a price per pound. You would set it to yes if you're manufacturing all of your rectangular duct and fittings. This will include a price per pound. You set it to each if you're buying some items and you manufacture some items. A lot of shops that purchase coil duct but manufacture all of their fittings will set this to each, then designate each of the items as fabricated yes or fabricated no. Over to the right, you can see that the canvas connector selections are available. You have 2 flex connectors available within each pressure class, and you must choose an available material type for each. And this will automatically pull the pricing per foot from the data file where you set up these flex connector material types. We'll now go back to the menu, and next we'll look at the scrap page. The scrap percentages are what you wish to have included of the manufacturing of your items. The first column here is duct percentage, and it goes off of the biggest dimension of the item. So a 24 by 12 will get the same scrap factor as a 24 by 24. You simply put in the number that you wish to use per size for both duct and fittings. All of the common shortcuts are still available in this file just as they were in the data file. Clicking on the column at the top will allow you to change everything over to one number by typing it in and hitting OK. You can also select a range of items and use the edit tools for filling, extrapolating, adding, and factoring. We'll now return back to the menu screen, and next we'll look at the seams. The seams are set up per item as well. You have duct, seam, and sealant types broken out from the fitting seam and sealant types. We'll first start with the duct. Again, running off of the biggest dimension, so the 24 by 12 would use the same line as the 24 by 24. If we look at the column here, we can see that that 24 by 12 piece of duct would use a seam type number 2. Look at the list at the bottom and we can see that that is snap lock. Having the Pittsburgh checked would allow it as an override or an alternate to the takeoff screen. Same thing can be done for the sealants, the fitting seams, and the radius seams. If you notice, our duct is going to be fabricated using a snap lock seam or a code number 2, where all of our fittings are being manufactured with a Pittsburgh seam or code number 1. The next portion of the page is dealing with the duct style or the number of seams on your duct. So a one-piece wrapper, so this would be a 3-bend 1-seam piece of duct, or 2 L shapes that are going to be assembled. We can see that the program is using the 2 L shape option all the way up to and through 108 inches of height plus width. Once it goes beyond that, we would then split it out to 4 individual pieces. The standard length is also set up on the height plus width. Let's return to the menu, and next we'll walk through the joints and reinforcements setup. The joints and reinforcements, along with the gauge, dictate to the program your SMACNA duct construction standards. First, we will look at what is going to be the standard length of duct. 72, 60, 48, 36, 30, and 24 are all options. As we saw on the materials page, 60 inch was our standard length, so we'll first refer to that. Looking at the gauge column, again, running off the biggest dimension, so 24 by 12 would use the 24-inch line. We're dictating that it's going to be a 22 gauge metal that's going to be used in the manufacturing of this item. The joint connector is a joint type 3. Let's look at the bottom, click on the Joints tab, and we can see that joint type 3 is a galvanized standing S&D drive. However, duct mate, flat S&D drive, and TDF-TDC are allowable alternates. All we would do is put in the code number of the item that's listed at the bottom that we wish to have available as the default in this pressure file, then checking the boxes at the bottom to allow your alternates. Same thing can be done for the sealants using your neoprene gasket, butyl gasket, duct sealer, and your caulking. The reinforcement types have to do with the center reinforcements as well as the joint reinforcements. And you have 2 different types of reinforcements: rod or internal reinforcement, and angles, or external reinforcements. The rod type is where you're putting in the code of the rod that's going to be used per size. We can see that the code for the rod at the smallest size is 22. Click on the Rods tab at the bottom, and you'll see that 22 rod is a no reinforcement rod. None required. We can see that that 22 goes all the way down to 48 inches in width. As soon as you go to 49 inches, we're using a rod type 1, which is a 1/2 inch conduloc. Where is it located? The very next column is asking for the quantity of your joint connector rods. We have a 0, so we're not using any reinforcements at the joint when it's 49 inches in width. However, we are using one center tie rod, so it's reinforcing the mid panel. As we look at our list, we can see that when we come down a little further, at 73 inches, we start using a joint rod. The number that you put in here is going to be the number at each end of the duct. The program will automatically double it for the 2 joint connections. The quantity of center rods is obviously only the number that's going to be in the mid panel. So at 85 inches, we're going to 2 mid panel tie rods. The next column over is the angle type. We can also see that it's using no angle or external reinforcement through 96 inches. At 97 inches, we're using an angle type 2, which is 1.5" by 1/8 inch black iron angle. We can see that we're only using 1 as our quantity. That mid-panel external reinforcement is going to go the width of the duct and only 1 on the top and the bottom. Once the 60-inch table is set up, we will then need to visit all of the other centerline lengths. These centerline lengths are not only for duct, but they are for fittings as well. If we look at the 48-inch table, this would be for anything that reached 48 inches in length. So this could be a transition 48 inches long, or this could be a square elbow with a centerline length equaling 48 inches. We'll want to go through and make sure that we set up the gauge, joint, and reinforcement tables that are going to reflect the items that we're going to use for this 48-inch centerline length. Same thing with the 36, 30, and 24. Most common change is on the 30-inch table when using a 5-foot standard length for your duct. What would that change be? If we look at the rod type, we can see that the rods are not starting until we reach 73 inches where we're using joint rods. The use of center or mid-panel tie rods has been disabled or zeroed so that it will not include them. Same thing with the external angle reinforcement. Basically, we're saying the duct is short enough, it doesn't require a center reinforcement. It only requires a joint reinforcement. Let's go ahead and go back to Menu, and that'll conclude the walkthrough for that joints and reinforcements page. Next up, hangers. On the hangers page, you'll notice that there's 3 columns. 1:1 aspect ratio, 1:2 aspect ratio, and a 1:3 aspect ratio. Look at the little white boxes right below them. We're talking about square ductwork, 1:1 aspect ratio, so a 12 by 12 piece of duct. If we look over here, we're looking at 1:2 aspect ratio, or rectangular ductwork. 1:2 would be, say, 12 by 24. And if we look at the next column, we're talking about 3:1 ductwork. So this has a ratio of 12 to 36. So basically, we're going to start with the 1:1 aspect ratio. Now, duct is determined not by big side like all of the other pages in the program, but by height plus width, because it goes off of the weight of the item. You can see that the default code that's set up here is a number 2. Number 2 is a 1" by 18 gauge galvanized strap, and we're using that all the way down through 96 inches of height plus width. Once we go above that, into the 108 range, we're jumping into a hanger type 8, which is 3/8 rod, 1" and 5/8 unistrut. And then when we get to the really large duct, we're jumping into a number 10, which is going to be the 1/2 inch rod, 1" and 5/8 unistrut. So we've dictated how we're going to hang square ductwork, And what these other two columns allow us to do is dictate if there's going to be any changes for rectangle and really wide rectangle ductwork. Most estimators, when they're setting this page up, they'll copy this column, paste it into here, and then if you look, they'll just jump into the trapeze system a couple of lines sooner. It allows you to take care of that span and not have any sag in your ductwork. The next portion of the page that we'll look at is the spacing. So we're talking about dictating hanger spacing. Whatever we set up in here, the program will use in the takeoff screen. So from the smallest size all the way down through 84 inches in width, we're dictating a hanger spacing of 8 feet. Once we go above 84 and start using 85-inch wide duct, it's going to use 6-foot spacing. Now, if you have a number in this column, the program will always use that number. When this file, this 2-inch standard SMACNA low-pressure galvanized file is loaded, this hanger spacing is respected, and you are not allowed to overwrite it during your takeoff. If you wish to have hanger spacing set by the job, you should leave this column empty or blank. I'm simply going to highlight all of it and hit delete and leave it empty. Let's go ahead and go back to the menu page. Next up is the turning vanes. Turning vanes. Simply set up by the biggest dimension of the ductwork, and you're just typing in the code for the turning vane listed at the bottom that you wish to have used as a default. You can also dictate if you wish to use a radius fitting vane as well. Let's go ahead and go back to menu, and we'll go to the wrap liner options. The wrap liner options are set up for you to disable specific wraps or liners that you wish to not allow in this file. We're starting on the wrap page, and so if we look at the top to remind ourselves, we're in a 2-inch standard SMACNA low-pressure galvanized file. So what wrap types do we not want allowed for this setup? I'm going to check 2-inch fire wrap and check quoted 2-inch fire wrap. I would not use fire wrap in this file, therefore I want to have it checked. Same thing with the liner setup. I'm going to check the items that I do not wish to have available. Let's return back to the menu page, and we'll look at the general options. The most common changes on this page are setting your lightest gauge. Click the drop down, set it to what your minimum gauge is for this file. Heaviest gauge, click the drop down and select the heaviest gauge you wish to have available for this file. The rest of this page will be covered in a more advanced training session. Let's return to menu, and we'll look at the notes page. A big blank notes page for you to type in any pressure file specific information that you wish to have recorded with this file. These notes will only be shown inside this file. We'll go back to menu, and this will conclude the basic walkthrough of a rectangular pressure file.